بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفي دفاع فار استفادة، وحتى تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير، ابتغاء والسلام والموضوع والقرب والتواب سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا، وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما، انك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of you your acts of ibadah, and may He allow for this to be a time of khair for you, as even though we are leaving the days of Eid, we are still within the sacred month of the Hijjah, and we'll all be going into the sacred month of Muharram. And so we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us and assist us with our shortcomings and facilitate for us khayr, facilitate for us good in deen wa dunya wa akhirah, in our religion, or you could say our way of life, our worldly affairs, and in our hereafter. So just as I usually will do, just as a way of clarifying our living Islam, is that this is a program that we developed some years ago because we had some of the students at the Mecca Center where they were saying that some of the things that they were interested in talking about, or even possibly asking or getting more information on, or getting others' opinions on, they just felt that they didn't have a space to be able to do that. And so we developed the Living Islam as a space for people to bring up for discussion different things that may be on their mind that they may otherwise feel that they don't get opportunity to talk about. So as we like to say, is that nothing is off the table. However, we just ask that everything be done with Islamic decorum. But I always like to mention that, for example, this is not a Q&A. So, people do not feel like they have to just necessarily have a question that they have to ask, but, this is an open discussion. Nor is it something where I'm the only one that has to be speaking. Is that, again, this is an open forum. This is not a lecture or anything of that nature. So the Living Islam, essentially, it goes based upon group participation. So it was the situation where we don't have necessarily group participation, then we can sit in each other's company for the next 2 hours and enjoy each other's sonic company. Because like I said, I don't have a lecture or anything like that prepared. This is, an open forum. So that little spiel, I will turn it over to those who are with us via Zoom, and then also in case anyone may be with us via YouTube. And I'm going to let it go from there. So we may have opted to sit in each other's silent company. لا بس. So there's a comment that was placed on Facebook where someone had said that they've appreciated the knowledge, but that they've left the deen. And so we asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may guide them back to Islam. The reality of anyone's situation in regards to the deen is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as it's mentioned in different places, in different ways, in the Quran as well as in the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, is that, as for example, there's mentioned a khutbah tahaja, the normative khutbah that is said on the day of Jummah, مَن يَحْلِبْنَا فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ وَمَن يُضْلِلْ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ, that whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows to go astray, there's none that can guide them, and whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, there's none that can misguide them. And so this is why we always say that the greatest form of da'wah, the greatest way of calling people to Allah, which is ultimately to Islam in terms of submission to Allah, is by making dua for them. And we make dua for them because, for one, we don't want it to be a situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ever takes Iman away from us. But at the same time, if we understand with certainty, as we are commanded to do, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, فَعْنَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ, know that there is no God other than Allah. Then if we know this with certainty, then we know the realities of the hereafter. And from the standpoint of mercy, just like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a Nabi Rahmah, was a prophet of mercy, is that we would never want anyone to leave this abode without being in a state of Islam. And so for the person who may be struggling in this regard, one of the things that we could recommend is that Sheikh Hamza Karamali, he has a program that he does, which is referred to as Why Islam is True. And the reason why we recommend that is because oftentimes when a person may leave Islam, it's because they were never truly certain about the truthfulness of Islam in the first place. Meaning that Islam may have been a preference, it may have been something that, felt good for a time, or whatever the case may be. But, for example, if we know for certain that Islam is true, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true, then whatever may come in our lives, it would never shake that reality. And so one of the reasons why we recommend Sheikh Hamza's program, Why Islam is True, and the primary portion of it can be obtained for free, is that if a person were to take that course and become firm in that, then inshallah, it would hopefully guide them back to Islam, and then also at the same time, keep them firm so that whatever trials or tribulations that they may go through that may have them question their Islam, that would not be a means of shaking their Iman. That would not be a means of shaking their belief in Allah, because they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true with certainty. So just like, for example, when we go through difficulties, it doesn't cause us to cease to believe in the sun, for example. That we understand that the sun, it exists, whether we have a good day, a bad day, whether or not someone would try to come and disprove to us that the sun exists, we know for absolute certainty that the sun exists. So even if, it's a cloudy day and we're having a bad day, it doesn't cause us to cease to believe in the sun. And so, inshallah, we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place us in a situation that we have that firm resolve. Uh, that firm resolve. I know beards are highly recommended or even mandatory for men. The Prophet ﷺ also has short-length hair. Is that also recommended? So in terms of the beard, yes, the beard is recommended. It in some situations, there are some ulama who consider it to be an obligation. But even the aspect of the beard, there's a difference of opinion of exactly what constitutes the beard. So for example, one of the positions in the Shafi madhab is that it's only that which grows on the actual chin. So basically, this area where my fingers are, my thumb and my pointer finger, for according to some of them out, that would be what constitutes the beard. And so as long as you allow for the hair on the chin to grow, according to some of the Shafi'i ulama, that would fulfill the sunnah of having the beard. This is why, for example, some of the habayib, some of the scholars from Yemen, you'll see that, you know, the only facial hair that they have is the hair that grows on the chin. That is a position within the Shafi school. Um, Others, they consider that the beard is whatever will be culturally recognized as the beard. So if I'm not mistaken, in the Maliki school, that is what's considered to be the beard. That, you know, whatever be culturally recognized as being the beard, that is what would be considered to be the beard. So it's not as if you have to necessarily let it grow fully out, but that you have something that is culturally recognized as the beard, and that will fulfill the sunnah. So the aspect of keeping the beard, yes, that is there, but the aspect of actually what constitutes the beard, there's some discussion in regards to that. In terms of the shoulder length hair, if a person were to do that, trying to emulate the Messenger of Allah sallam, in some of the descriptions of him having shoulder length hair, then that could be considered to be something commendable in the sense that a person is trying to emulate the Prophet Muhammad sallam, but there is no necessarily recommendation in terms of how a person keep outside of them keeping it well kempt and not having it be in a situation where they have any extreme disparities within the haircut itself. So meaning like, for example, that, you know, a mohawk type of style where you have a significant amount of hair in one area and then no hair in the other area. So, but, you know, for example, some of the companions themselves, they were known to be bald. So for example, Ali ibn Abi Talib and also Umar ibn Khattab, they were known to have no hair whatsoever. And these are some of the, you know, companions who are closest to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, um, again, if a person wanted to have shoulder length hair based upon some of the descriptions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then, you know, you can. But also keep in mind is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would have his hair in different capacities throughout his life. So the description that they mention is that sometimes he would have it come to his earlobe. Sometimes he would have it come to halfway between the earlobe and the shoulder. And then occasionally he would have it come all the way down to the shoulder. However, it wasn't necessarily something where he made it such that the men of his ummah should necessarily have it in this particular way or the other. Rather, it was something that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself would sometimes change the manner in which he held his hair. And what that does for us is that it allows us to see that there are different ways in which a man can grow his hair. Because just as we mentioned about, for example, Ali and Amr, is that for some men, they won't even be able to grow hair. You know, some men are naturally bald. Now, for a woman, it's recommended that she keeps her hair, meaning that she does not have a short haircut, because part of a woman's beauty, part of her zina, is in her hair. That's part of the reason why women are required to cover up the hair, but it's recommended that a woman not keep her hair excessively short. But for men, it can vary. It can be shorter. I mean, even if you read according to some ulama, they'll say that a haircut is going to be based upon urf. It's going to be based upon common custom. So, for example, if you're in an area where the common custom is that, for example, effeminate men wear long hair, then it would be considered a situation where you actually shouldn't have your hair long. That you should actually just cut it short. You should keep it cut low. So again, there's nothing as, you know, the beard, it's that is more direct in terms of the aspect of keeping the beard. But again, like we said before, the different schools of law, they differ. Even within the schools of law themselves, they may differ in terms of exactly how a man should keep a beard, or what would be considered to be the minimum amount of a beard. However, in terms of hairstyle, again, as long as it is kept up, is kept looking neat, and that it is not extreme in any aspect in terms of, like, for example, having a portion of it shaved and having another portion of it not shaved or anything of that nature, then a man can more or less wear his hair in whatever dignified style that he chooses to. There are some exceptions to that, but uh, we won't get too much into it. Do you think the kingdom will have to make changes in Hajj customs after the heat crisis this year? I actually didn't necessarily hear about the heat crisis, but Allahu Alam. I mean, the Saudi government seems to be in more recent times constantly making changes. So, I mean, if it becomes a major issue, then I'm sure that they'll make adjustments in regards to whatever may need to be adjusted. But Allahu Alam, that's going to be um, a governmental decision that they're going to have to make. But I mean, there are certain aspects of the Hajj that can't be, adjusted just because it's a part of the act of ibadah for the Hajj to be valid. there has been an uptick in Muslims in fight sports, and yet some scholars opine that striking the face outside of self-defense is prohibited. Is there room for difference of opinion and current jurisprudence on the issue? So it's funny. I forget who the person is, but yeah, I know there's for example, there's a very popular Muslim UFC fighter. And I remember he was having a fight a couple of years ago that was like a big thing. Um, and I remember one of the few posts that I actually placed on Facebook. Yeah, there you go. I don't want to necessarily want to say people by name, but in any case, I remember putting a post on Facebook some long ago and far away, and I just put like, I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but when did the UFC become permissible? So the thing is that for the most part, it's more or less ijma. When we say ijma, we mean consensus that even if you wanted to say that there were reasons, for example, to possibly hit someone in the face, let's just say that there was the possibility of that. We have a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad where the Prophet he says, La darar, la darar, that there be no harming, no reciprocation of harm. So part of the meaning of which is that it is not permissible to cause harm to anything in creation if there is no Sharia countenance, if there is no place in the Islamic law to say that one can do so. We also have hadith of the Prophet where he indicates, for example, that the shedding of blood, in particular, the shedding of the blood of a Muslim is haram illa thalath, except in three cases. The person who is married who commits zina, meaning the person that commits adultery, a nafs bi nafs, and the life for a life, and murtad, the person who apostates. And so we see here, these different statements of the Prophet Muhammad where he indicates where the Prophet he indicates the impermissibility of causing harm, even from the standpoint of even the aspect of animals, is that for example, it is not permissible for a Muslim to harm an animal without due process, meaning that there has to be some Sharia continence, like we talk about it in the New Muslim program, like sport hunting or sport fishing is haram. It's impermissible. You can't hunt or fish just for the sake of the sport. Why? Because it's considered to be harm to an animal. So the thing is that, and I remember because some of my teachers had actually commented on the post that I put up there, and I was actually surprised. Like one of them, he just commented by giving it a thumbs up, and another of them, he commented it by saying different comments in regards to it. But the basis of it is that for the most part, it's ijma. There's consensus that it's impermissible. But as one of my teachers had put on the post the comment that he placed on my post is that, because again, I had asked the question, like, when did the UFC become permissible? His response was that, once it became popular enough. Meaning that, unfortunately, we have situations where when something becomes socially acceptable and socially commended, then it's as if we forget about the Sharia and we go straight to whatever popular society is doing. And then the thing is that for some people they don't even necessarily know the ruling of it. From for the standpoint, for the overwhelming, for a good, I would say for a good portion of Muslims, if you ask them, if hitting someone in the face is haram, many of them may not even know the answer. And so the thing is that it's a situation where some people are just ignorant of it, and then we get caught up in our emotions. Because again, like I remember when this was like a real big thing, is that the person that he was going against was someone who had said disrespectful things about Muslims and so on and so forth. So again, I placed in my post is like, look, I'm not trying to defend or trying to say that I'm not upset about someone saying ill things about Muslims. But at the same time, I'm not going to justify something that is pretty much categorically haram as being the response to it, and saying Allahu Akbar that he does it. The end does not justify the means. Is that the example that I gave is that if someone says something ill about Islam, I'm not going to say Allahu Akbar if a rapper comes and makes a diss track, you know, towards that individual. Is that just because someone says something ill or does something haram, does something against Muslims, it doesn't give Muslims the permissibility to take whatever means that they want to respond back. Is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even says in the Quran that we're supposed to do what? Respond with that hilati ahsan. That if you look at that word ahsan, one of the ways that it can be interpreted is that which is better, but another way that it can be interpreted or loosely translated is that which is even more beautiful. So how is trying to beat someone up for sport something beautiful? Not only that, but as some of the other ulama have mentioned, just even about the whole concept of like UFC and so on and so forth, is that not only that you have that, but you have two individuals, whether it's men or women, who are wearing inappropriate clothing. Like they're basically naked. They only cover up, as much of their body as is like legally required. Secondly, you have different haram organizations that support this. So the beer industry is a major supporter of like the UFC and so on and so forth. Not only that, but you also have gambling that is rampant, in these particular sporting events. Not only that, but you also have the inappropriate mixing of people, particularly when they're coming together, getting intoxicated, and so on. So so like, at what point do we get to something that's permissible? Like, what of it can we really say is all that permissible? And so the thing is that again, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that he perfected the religion, he perfected Islam, he did not perfect Muslims. So the reality of it is that, trying to use the analogy that, oh, well, I've seen a lot of Muslims, supporting, this individual, that individual, and so on and so forth. I mean, if you go to the Muslim world, you also see a lot of Muslims that smoke. That doesn't remove the impermissibility. The unfortunate thing is that you see a lot of Muslims do a lot of things, and that doesn't make it permissible. Again, many people who are Muslim don't necessarily fully have a strong knowledge of the religion. Again, especially when we talk about people who are born Muslim, meaning that they have Muslim parents, because oftentimes what happens is that we grow up from the standpoint of a cultural Islamic experience. Is that we go based upon what our parents and our relatives and our extended family and our friends around us, the way that they practice Islam, and oftentimes is very much, a cultural experience of Islam. And so that, just because we see Muslims doing something does not necessarily mean that it's permissible. So even if we see Muslim organizations, whatever case, that's why I put the Facebook post up, because I've seen individuals that and I'm not trying to say this from a standpoint of arrogance, but I know that these individuals can sometimes be influential. So it was kind of trying to be a reminder, is that, this is something that is haram. Like, this is impermissible. And we shouldn't necessarily, especially if we're going to be in a position where people will look to us in order to ascertain, like, what is permissible, what is not. It shouldn't be a situation where we are promoting or even having it seem as if we're promoting something as haram. And again, the aspect of the aspect of all these different elements that in particular, like with the UFC or even boxing, or any other type of sport where the main purpose is hitting someone in the face and causing harm. This is one of the reasons why, for example, I have a much greater respect for something like jujitsu than I do for many other fighting styles. In particular, because with something like jujitsu, you can actually control if you even harm someone or not. Like, for example, anyone that's ever did jujitsu, you know that I can basically get a person in position where even if I'm not trying to cause them harm, I can stop them from causing harm. Meaning that I can place a person in a particular situation or particular condition where I'm actually not harming you, but if I wanted to, I could, but I can keep you from being able to do anything else. So for example, for those who may have some type of jujitsu knowledge, like if I put a person in the arm bar, essentially I'm putting you in a position where you can't necessarily move, but if I want to, I could possibly break your arm. But I have control over that. I can control whether or not I just stop you from being able to move, such that hopefully you just give up trying to cause me harm, or I can actually harm you. Whereas with something like, for example, boxing or UFC or something like that, if I punch someone, even if I don't punch him in the face, I punch him in the chest, I can't dictate how much harm that's going to cause them. That if I punch someone in the chest, then I actually may break their ribs or, whatever the case may be. And so, for example, I used to, if it's not obvious, I used to take jujitsu, um, but I never watched the UFC. The only thing that I would sometimes watch would be actual jujitsu matches where there wasn't any striking. It was purely jujitsu, which is based upon submission. And I didn't even really watch that and watch them all that much. I mean, at one point in time, I would watch it a little bit more, but it wasn't like, a constant thing per se. So yeah, the thing is, like I said, like I put on Facebook, it's like, I'm probably going to get in trouble for this because again, as one of my teachers said that, it has become popular. So people, they like it and they want to, engage with it and so on and so forth. And again, it was this whole situation of like him, like being like the defender of the Muslims. But the thing is that, we are not to justify the haram, even when someone is trying to do something to defend the Muslims. Is that as Muslims, we're supposed to be at a greater standard. And so again, I don't want to mention names, but the thing is that at the same time, I'm not going to be in a situation to try to justify something that is necessarily known to be haram for the sake of popular culture or what people consider to be a defense of the religion. That, as far as I'm concerned, I have to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm not trying to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that the haram is halal. Na'udhu billah. I got enough things I have to worry about, let alone to do that. Matter of fact, Where to buy cool hijab to wear in extreme hot weather? Sister Minna, are you the Mecca Center host? Can I ask you to answer that question? I'm just being honest. I've never had to specifically. I mean, I could try to ask my wife, and I don't even know, I don't even think she's downstairs. Um, but actually many hijabs are more or less made somewhat light. Just because many places where it's a Muslim majority country are places where it's typically hotter than other places. Jazakallahu khairan. What does Allah say about battling depression? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in regards to aspects of depression, uh, that's Ada inna awliya Allahu la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. That verily the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they should not be grieved over, nor they should not be la khawf, they should not be feared upon, nor shall they be grieved over. And part of the ways that we can understand this is there's actually a book. If a person wanted to get from Sheikh, it's actually a compilation of talks that Sheikh Muhammad Ramadan Abuti has given, and it's actually called Depression and Anxiety. It's a book that's been translated, and like I said, it's from Sheikh Muhammad Ramadan Abuti, and he talks about the aspect of depression and anxiety because we're seeing it on the increase. And so one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in regards to that is that he also says in the Quran, Allah bi dhikrillahi tatma'inna qulub. Is it not except by the remembrance of Allah that hearts find rest? And so one of the main reasons why people will sometimes find themselves in a state of anxiety or depression is for one, is that sometimes our certainty in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not necessarily at a place that it needs to be in order to be able to combat the different aspects of depression and anxiety. And what I mean by that is somewhat, as we mentioned before, is that sometimes our Islam and our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a preference and not an aspect of absolute certainty. Because essentially, if we, and Sheikh Ramadan Abuti, he goes into some of the details about this in his book, but essentially, if we don't have a true certainty about Allah, and then extension the akhirah. So for example, there are different hadith for the Prophet ﷺ. For example, at least there's one hadith for the Prophet ﷺ. He says, "Man kana yu'minu billah wa yawm al-akhir." And then he mentions different things. He says, whoever believes in Allah and the last day. And then he mentions different things. Part of the aspect of the Prophet ﷺ mentioning and Yawm al-Akhir and the last day is that if I have certainty about the last day, then what it does is that it puts things in perspective. So if I have certainty about Allah, such that I have certainty about the last day and everything that it entails, then it starts to place things into perspective, which goes back into the verse of Quran that we mentioned, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah bi dhikrillahi tatma'inna qulub. Is it not except by the remembrance of Allah that hearts find rest? Is that the more that we increase in our certainty about Allah and the last day, and one of the primary ways of doing that, meaning gaining that certainty, is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's to be in a constant state of dhikr of Allah. That is going to help. And by doing that, is that it starts to put things in perspective. Is that the more that we remember Allah, the less that we have a concern for this dunya. Because, and then again, this is something that Sheikh Ramadan Abuti mentions in his book, is that for many people, one of the reasons why, for example, nowadays we're seeing a rise in depression and anxiety, it's not as if it didn't exist before, but we're seeing an increase in it, is that we become such a global world, is that with all these different social media sites and so on and so forth, we just get to a point where we feel like everyone else is having a great time, and our world, we're just, the the person that is just missing out, so to speak. Meaning that we are bombarded with seeing people in all their different capacities in terms of how much fun they're having. And for example, there is a book by I believe his name is Rupert Sheldrake. I'm hoping I'm not confusing him with the what is his name? Leonard Sachs, that's his name. Sorry. Rupert Sheldrake is somebody else. But there's a book by Leonard Sachs called Girls on the Edge. And basically, this book is talking about some research that Leonard Sachs has done in relationship to girls growing up. And one of the things that he mentioned in his research is that what he's found is that many women are, particularly young girls, we're talking about like teenage, early 20s, are finding themselves in greater states of depression and anxiety, partly, or should I say, a good portion of which is based upon social media. And he gives an example. And so what he says is that on average, when a woman or a young girl posts on social media, they're only going to post positive things. So they're going to post when they got a new puppy. They're going to post when they went on vacation. They're going to post when they got this new gift. They're going to post when they had some situation that was great with their boyfriend or whatever the case may be. But they're going to post about the positive things that are going on in their lives. They're not going to, however, post about the different negative things that they're dealing with. So they're not going to post like when their dog dies. They're not going to post necessarily when they break up with their boyfriend. They're not going to post of like, how sick they got on vacation and so on and so forth. But what that does is that it places a person that is viewing these the posts of these other people. It makes it where, again, that other women, for example, will feel as if, well, man, she's having all this fun and I'm stuck with all these different problems and issues that I'm going through. And so now we're looking at our lives through the lens of other people. But the thing is that we're only seeing a snapshot. Out of the 365 days of the year, we're looking at 10 or 12. This is the highlights of this person's entire year. And we're just looking at the highlights. But we're making it such that those highlights represent that person's entire existence, and that person's entire existence is way better than my existence. And so we start to form this sense of depression. However, if we go back to what we were talking about before, this aspect of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remembrance of Allah in the next life, then we start to understand is that, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ, that everything upon it is perishing. Meaning what? meaning that everything that we can possibly enjoy in this life is only going to be temporary. And so, for example, if I were to offer someone a diamond ring that they can hold in their hand for 2 minutes, or if I offered them a pot and a pan that they can have forever, which one are they going to choose? I'm asking the question. If you offered a diamond ring that you can hold for 2 minutes versus a pot and a pan that you can have forever, which one would you choose? You choose the diamond that you can only hold for 2 minutes versus a pot and a pan that you would hold can have forever. Yeah, generally speaking, the person is going to choose that which lasts forever. Why? Because you understand that even if I hold that diamond for 2 minutes, I'm not going to be able to benefit from it. That diamond that I might be able to hold for 2 minutes means nothing at the end of the day because I can't benefit. Whereas if I get a pot and a pan that I can have forever, then I can at least utilize that to have some benefit from it. And so that is an example of something of this life, of this worldly life. So what about the nature of this perishing world in comparison to the next life, which lasts forever? But again, it gets back to that aspect. Do we have absolute certainty about it? Because again, if we have absolute certainty about it, then we start to understand that why am I so concerned about how much I don't have of this worldly life? Because at the end of the day, it's all going to be perishing anyway. Many of the ulama, or at least some of the ulama they mention, is that the reality of anything that we have is that unless we truly benefit from it, meaning that we either spend it on ourselves or others, or we use it for the sake of Allah, then it's not really ours. So like the perfect example is like a person that has some large amount of money in a bank account. That unless that person actually utilizes that money for something, meaning like I said, whether it's going to be to benefit them or the people around them, or it's going to be for spending for the sake of Allah, then that money is not really theirs. Because think about it, unless they actually use that money, all it is holding it for whoever else is going to come after them and get a hold of that money and use it. So basically, they actually don't even have that money. Not to mention is that the ulama, they also point out, is that as long as a person is in want of something, that person is always going to be in a state of poverty. So even if a person is super rich, but they still want more, that person is in a state of poverty. But the person that has nothing, meaning that they don't have much of it, of this worldly life, but they're content. They don't need anything else. That person is the one that's truly, that is the person that's truly rich. Because just think about it. How much do we really need? As long as you have food to eat, clothes to put in your back, and a place to have over your head, how much more do you really need? But the thing is that we're bombarded with this aspect of materialism. And when I'm talking about materialism here, I'm talking about the aspect of social economic materialism. Is that we keep getting fed that we need more, that we need to have the latest and greatest. I mean, how many pixels can they put in a phone to make an upgrade? I mean, do you really notice the difference between the pixels? But they keep pumping out these phones, every 6 months or sooner. And we just keep buying and buying and buying and buying. And so what that does is that it connects our hearts to this world so that when we don't have it, we're depressed. We have anxiety. Oh, how am I going to get this? How am I going to keep affording this? And so on and so forth. And so what that does is that it leads to an aspect of increased depression and anxiety. But before I continue, let me read this. I understand your point, but life is a tragedy for everyone. Before the judgment day, Antichrist and sunrise from the west all sound bad. If I die before that time due to war, accident, or old age, nothing is cheerful. For the super rich, they would die of old age or accident. That was tragic ending too. So the thing is that no one is saying that there isn't going to be trials and tribulations. If anything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He confirms that. He says, ما خلقت الجن excuse me, He says, الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. He is the one who created death and life in order to test you to see which of you is going to be best in works. So the thing is that yes, there is going to be different types of calamities, different types of trials and tribulations. But again, this aspect of having certainty about Allah and certainty about the akhirah, it puts those things into perspective, meaning that this setback that I'm going through is only temporary. And you're right, at the end of the day, all of us are going to die. And so as if I make my focus preparing for the next life, I make my focus the akhirah, then it doesn't really matter what happens in this world in terms of difficulties and things of that nature. Why? Because I know that this is not my ultimate reality. This is part of the reason why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ad-dunya sijnatul mu'min wa jannatul kafir." That this world is the prison for the believer and the paradise for the disbeliever. Part of the understanding of that is that the reason why it's a prison for the believer, because yes, you're going to be constricted. You know, there are certain things that you have to do, certain things you can't do, certain desires that you may have that you're going to have to keep under control or not be able to act upon them at all. But by doing that, what it does is that it gives you a situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if you control yourself in that manner, then I will give you forever bliss. Meaning I will give you a bliss that you can't even imagine. Not only can you not even imagine it, but it's going to last forever. It's never going to come to an end. Such that you could just think of what you want and it'll be there. And so, however, on the flip side, where the Prophet ﷺ says it's a Jannah, it's a paradise for the disbeliever, that is from the standpoint of that for the person that disbelieves in Allah, that means that they're only going to, whatever goodness they receive is just going to be in this life. And the reality of it is, it goes back to that diamond and pot example that I gave. Is that what is 100 years in comparison to forever? If you place 100 over infinity, what is the answer to the equation? Come on, my math people. What is 100 over infinity? 100 over infinity is basically 0. You take 100 divided by infinity, it's going to be basically 0. Meaning what? That in comparison to, even if a person, because the average person is not going to live to be 100 years old. But even if a person did live to be 100 years old, in comparison to forever, it's as if, as it mentions in the Quran, that people will be asked, how long were you in this world? And people will say, it's as if we were in there for a yawmin or ba'da yawm, that we were there for a day or part of a day. And that's the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he mentions that there will be people who, when they are placed in paradise, when they are placed in Jannah, they'll be asked, and these are the people who had some of the worst and most wretched lives in this world, that they went through many, many trials and tribulations. And they'll just be dipped into paradise, just like, just a quick dipping into paradise. And they'll be asked, have you ever experienced any hardship in your life? And they'll actually respond by saying, no, we've never experienced any hardship. We've never experienced any evil. Just because of how beautiful and how joyous paradise is. Whereas for the disbeliever, it's going to be the opposite. Is that the disbeliever who has been given everything in this dunya, he's been given all these riches and so on and so forth, and they'll be dipped into the hellfire. And then he'll be asked, have you ever experienced any good? And they'll say, no, we've never experienced any good. With all the different, pleasures they experience in this life, just one dip in the hellfire will cause them to forget all of that. And so again, it's this aspect is that oftentimes we focus on this world. And for example, we look for justice and ultimate bliss and so on and so forth in this world. And again, if we do that, if we try to put our pleasure into the things of this world, we are always going to find ourselves in a state of depression. Why? Because everything in this world is temporary. This is why Allah tries to make sure our focus is on Him and the Akhirah. Because again, if our focus is on this world, it's always going to be depressing. Think of anything that you love. Everyone right now who's actually paying attention to me, do me a favor. Think of the greatest time that you've ever had in your life. Everyone just stop and think of that. Think of the time in your life that you are the most happy. Everyone think about that situation. Everyone has at least one situation they're thinking of. I'm asking this because this is the only way that I can see if people are engaging. Because right now it's almost like I'm talking to myself. But everyone can think of a situation. Mr. Gia, you can think of a situation? Okay. Okay. So it seems that everyone can think of a situation. Now, the mere fact that all of you can say that you can think of that one situation proves my point. Why? Because how many of you can actually get that moment back? You know, whatever it is. For some people, it might have been the birth of their child. It could have been their wedding day. It could have been when they got good health news after having a long time dealing with health and so on and so forth. You know, so on and so forth. Or, you know, exactly like Danzi put, currently no, but they wish they could. But that's the reality of this dunya, is that any goodness that we experience, it's always going to be temporary. It's always going to be taken away. And so again, the aspect of it is that the more that we increase in our understanding of Allah and who He is, and having that certainty in Allah in the Akhirah, in the next life, then it's going to decrease our love of this world, because we're going to start to understand more and more how insignificant this world is. And this is what made the Sahaba so special, is that they were able to come to that realization such that they didn't want the dunya. And because they didn't want the dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to them. Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhu, the second caliph, the second leader of the Muslims after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had no want for the dunya, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the most conquest of any of the khulafa for the most part. Definitely of the khulafa Rashideen. The first four caliphs to lead the Muslims, Omar had the greatest openings. But at the end of the day, he lived a very simple life. So much so that some of the women didn't want for their husbands to work on them, because he required for his governors to live a simple, austere life as well. But again, his situation was he didn't have a concern for this world, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving it to him at his feet, essentially. And so, again, the nature of Islam is not to say that we're not going to have struggles and difficulties. That, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's already informed us that that is going to be the situation. But what it is that He's informed us of part of the major ways that we go through this, is that we remember Allah, we remember the Akhirah, and we realize that this life is not our final abode. This life is not our ultimate destination. Ultimate destination is the Akhirah. Another way that it can be put is that, for example, if I was traveling to California, you know, for example, my ultimate destination is California. And that is where like my family is, or my good friend is, my spouse is, you know, whatever it is that's going to make me very happy. But along the way, I have to travel there first. So say I'm going from New York to California. If I have some difficulty while I'm in Tennessee, and then I have another difficulty while I'm in Texas, then I have another difficulty while I'm in Nevada, is that necessarily going to change the happiness that I'm looking forward to when I reach California? Or am I still going to be looking forward to getting to California, even with all these difficulties that may come in the meantime? Is that generally speaking, for many people, they're still going to have that happiness of arriving to their destination, of actually getting to California. So similarly, in this dunya, yes, we may have trials and tribulations that come in this dunya, but for the mu'min, we understand that this is just temporary. And that ultimately, if we get to a higher level of certainty, then it becomes a situation where we don't even care about the aspects of the things that happen in this dunya because we know that it's temporary anyway. So our hearts are not connected to it. Because one of the reasons why the dunya becomes a depressing place is because our hearts are connected to it. So when we don't have whatever it is that we want from the dunya, then we have that heartbreak. But if our hearts are disconnected from it, then whether we have it or whether we don't, it doesn't make a difference. And that's why, again, we go back to the aspect of Allah, because Allah is something, or should I say Allah is someone who we can never be separated from if we so choose. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not limited by time or space or place or any of these type of things. You can be the richest man in the world, you can be the poorest man in the world, and still have equal access to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas if we place our happiness in terms of the dunya, in terms of this worldly life, then is it true happiness? How many rich people do we hear about committing suicide or living lives of depression themselves, are afraid to go outside, are afraid of the people around them because they don't know if they're there to try to rip them off and so on and so forth? You know, how many celebrities do you hear about, you know, struggling with alcohol and other type of drug addictions and so on and so forth? You know, that's an indication that this world is not going to be able to make you happy. And that's the true reality. Nothing in this world is going to make you happy. Because again, anything that you attain in this world is only going to be temporary. Now, everything that I just said is not to discount the aspect of, for example, clinical mental depression, meaning that for some people, it's not just an aspect of a spiritual aspect, it's also the aspect of the mental instability that they may have. Some people, they have, you know, verifiable mental depressions, meaning that there's some mental instability that may need to be looked at. So I don't want people to think that I'm discrediting or, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? That I'm like not believing in the aspect of clinical depression, that some people, they do have mental situations where they need to see a mental specialist. However, what I would say is that part of the problems that we have in modern day psychology and therapies is that they look at depression as purely being, at least sometimes, they look at depression as only purely being a mental situation. Whereas from the standpoint of the Muslims, we understand that the human being is made up of at least three faculties. You have the mind, the body, and the soul. So the mind, we understand that. And again, that's what most therapy and psychology will focus on. They'll just focus on the mental aspects. However, if you're not focusing on the other aspects, because sometimes they'll focus on the mental and the physical. But if you're focusing on the mental and the physical and you're not addressing the spiritual, then essentially what you're doing is that you're trying to heal someone with 2/3 of the medicine. So, for example, anyone that's ever gone to a medical doctor for an infection that they may have, and they give you antibiotics. What do they always say when they give you antibiotics? You have to take the entire regimen. Even if you start to feel better, don't stop taking it until you complete the entire regimen. And so it's a situation where you want to make sure that we're dealing with everything. We're dealing with the mental aspect, you're dealing with the physical aspect, and you're dealing with the spiritual aspect. The mental, the physical, and the spiritual. But again, for many Muslims who are facing aspects of depression, um, one of the areas that I will look into is also the aspect of developing greater certainty with our understanding of Allah and His Messenger, and to try our best to try to increase in that certainty. Kind of almost sounds like I'm just constantly repeating it, but it may not sound like it is a partial, it may not sound like it's an actual medicine, but it actually is. So a Muslim who's dealing with depression or anxiety, one of the things I can suggest is, again, similar to the Facebook comment that we had earlier, is consider looking into the Why Islam is True course. And I'm not getting paid by Why Islam is True. So this is not like a, what they call it? This is not an endorsement per se, but again, having certainty in Allah, which will also help in our certainty in the Akhirah, will help us put things in perspective, which will also help in terms of depression and anxiety. Again, it's not to say that we don't necessarily still look into the aspect of like clinical depression and things of that nature, but again, oftentimes at best they're only looking at 2/3 of the situation. Is that you have to look at the human being in its entirety, the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all the Muslims who struggle with all the different struggles that we all may struggle with. Does Allah support Western medicine? In general, we say that anything that is a benefit is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated for us, because reality of it is that even from for the standpoint of medicine, the ultimate understanding from Islamic perspective is that the medicine does not do anything in and of itself. It's rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows for that to be a means of benefit. So I know science started from out of world, probably the Prophet ﷺ taught them, but how do Western medicine start? Do you think I shall rely on antidepressant medicine? The thing is that I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not in a position to tell a person whether or not they should take antidepressant medicine. If a person feels that they are truly struggling with mental depression, then I would say that it's definitely feasible to go to a psychologist. If a person can, ideally, if they're especially a Muslim, if they can go to a Muslim psychologist, so that hopefully these three areas, as I mentioned, can be looked at. And the reason why I say that is that, for example, and this is an example that one of my teachers gave, is that, again, from the standpoint of psychology, the primary focus is going to be the mental. So I give an example. Like someone can go to a psychologist and they'll say something like, "Oh, well, I feel overwhelmed, trying to keep up with my prayers, meaning that they're Muslim." So they're talking about, for example, the 5 daily prayers. I get overwhelmed, I feel that, because sometimes people may struggle with OCD, for example. And so sometimes they may do things in the prayer, or even with purification. Like, for example, people may take 20 minutes to make wudu, for example. They feel like, they didn't wash enough in terms of their limb, or that one portion didn't get wet enough, whatever the case may be. But in any case, in a clinical psychology environment, a psychologist may actually tell a person, well, why don't you just stop praying altogether? Or just stop, making wudu altogether. as a means of trying to get that person to not have that be a burden upon them, because it seems like it's overwhelming. Whereas from a standpoint of it, from Islam, we would never tell someone to not pray. We would look at it again from a holistic standpoint, understanding the importance of the prayer, but also looking at this person's situation from the clinical situation that they may be in and trying to address all of those issues. So, for example, what some of the ulama would say, for example, is that they would tell a person that may be suffering from a form of OCD, which can be leading them to a state of depression, is that for you specifically, we're going to say, just do the basic prayer. I mean, the basic wudu. Don't go any further. Any doubts that you have after that, don't pay any attention to that. As much as it may, as much as you may want to engage into it, don't do it. So that they're not telling this person not to engage in the prayer, but at the same time, they are trying to address this mental OCD that they may be going through. So is psychology trustworthy? It depends who you ask. One of my teachers, she she's very skeptical in regards to psychology. She actually had recommended a book at one point in time. The book was actually called Cracked: Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good. This is a book she actually recommended. So I have teachers who are very critical about psychiatry and the like. There's another book that was also recommended, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Time-tested methods for conquering worry. This was another book that was recommended by a teacher of mine. So to say that, anything that is going to be crafted from human beings, it's always going to have its flaws. So I'm not going to say that the entire science of psychology is faulted. But that's why I said that if a person is going to go to a psychologist, trying to go to a Muslim psychologist. So, for example, one of my teachers, Dr. Khalil Rashid, she'd probably have my neck if I were to try to completely disband the science of psychology. So if you want to, Dr. Khalil Rashad, she is a Muslim psychologist. So that is one person who specifically deals with psychology. Dr. Camila. She was one of my professors when I was doing my master's degree in Islamic chaplaincy. She's actually the professor that I took the most of. And I always like to tell her that every time I've taken her class, she's always made me go into a zone that I was very uncomfortable in. But psychology is one of her areas. And so she would be a resource that could possibly know of different Jazakallah khair. So yes, there are different Muslim psychologists that are out there. Some, of course, are going to be better than others, just like in any field. But yes, there are some. So even though technically speaking, I did not have Dr. Camilla as a personal psychologist per se, she definitely, uh, gave me some therapy sessions, so to speak. But again, there's there are different aspects to it. And so, yeah, so there are different Muslim health professionals. Um, I don't know of necessarily online directories, kind of just, different people know of different organizations and the like. So, as I mentioned, Dr. Camila is someone that I know personally. And then, yes, there also is the Khalil Center, and then Muslim counseling in Canada. Uh, that can be a reference point. I'm not familiar with them, but Sister Mina seems to be familiar with them. So, but that could be a reference point. Um, but again, my advice for Muslims in particular is to try to find a psychologist if you're going to go that route that is going to look at it from, again, the holistic perspective, keeping the spiritual as well as the physical and the mental in perspective. Because again, oftentimes psychologists are trained just to look at it from a mental perspective. And from the standpoint of Islam, it's not just a mental situation, generally speaking. Is that it's, again, looking at the entirety of the human being. And again, for many Muslims, it's oftentimes going to be a combination of the mental and the spiritual, and it's going to be on different levels. So for some Muslims, if you just address the spiritual, that will be enough for them. And then there are some Muslims, if you just address the mental, that may be enough. But there's also going to be those who are going to need both addressed, meaning both are in a state of imbalance. But again, it's this aspect of recognizing all these different faculties and not just honing in on one, because as the saying goes, if it's not broke, then don't try to fix it. So if a person is going to a psychologist and their actual depression or anxiety has to deal with their spiritual state, they can have all the mental medicines in the world. It's still not going to help them. Just similar that if a person goes to a spiritual sheikh and their overarching issue is mental, that still may not necessarily be what's going to help them. Even though I would say that for the spiritual sheikh, it'd probably be better, just because hopefully if you get a competent spiritual sheikh, that they will be able to recognize the different aspects of the faculties, whether it be mental, spiritual, or physical. And this is why traditionally in Islamic societies, the psychologist was the murabbi, it was the sheikh. He would guide his students in terms of getting them in a state of balance so that they didn't go into one extreme or the other. And so if I were to say, as the saying goes, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But if I were to say, if you were going to put your eggs all in one basket, I would go with the spiritual sheikh before I would go to the psychologist. And again, I'm not saying to not, consult a psychologist. I'm just saying that, a psychologist in general, particularly when you're coming from an academic perspective, you're not looking at it from a holistic perspective. You're looking at it from the standpoint of mental issues and essentially placebos or drugs. I would, venture to say, like, if you want to look at Leonard Sax's books, he has multiple different books that he's written. Girls on the Edge was just one. He has another book called Boys Adrift. He has another book on parenting specifically. I forget the name of it, but just look at the different books of Leonard Sachs. And one of the things that he has, mentioned, and he's not even Muslim, but one of the things that he has mentioned is this aspect that we are over drugging people, where it's just like every situation that a person comes up with is just take this pill, take that pill, take this antidepressant, take this, and we're really not addressing people in terms of their holistic being. And just placing people in placebos is not actually helping people. You know, having a situation where people just are become numb is not uh is not necessarily a thing that is necessary uh uh is not necessarily something that is actually going to fully help people. Drugs are not always the answer. Again, I'm not doing absolutes. I'm not saying that it's never a situation that a person shouldn't be given a particular type of medicine. But again, as Leonard Sachs mentions, is that it becomes an overdoing it. Where it's just like, we just go straight to, oh, take this drug. And then that's just it. You know, that uh, that is unfortunately, and that's why I said you want to really go to a reputable if you're on again, if you're going to go the psychologist route, you really want to go to a reputable psychologist who is trained in that way. Like even when I was doing my master's degree in Islamic chaplaincy, in one of my classes, I forget exactly which one, we were reading about a particular psychologist who was doing something that was kind of considered to be unorthodox within psychology. And basically what she was doing was that she was actually bringing in a spiritual component into her psychology practice. And that was considered to be unorthodox. Like, you don't do that in psychology. So that's what I'm saying is that psychology, again, when it's purely coming from an academic perspective, it tends to be imbalanced. And the way that some psychologists would do it is that if their mental exercises don't kind of like fix you within a certain period of time, then it just becomes, okay, we're just going to give you X amount of drugs or whatever the case may be. And that is not necessarily the solution for people. Essentially, I would say that drugs should be the last option. Again, I'm not saying that it won't be the option for some people, but that should not be like at the forefront of a person's situation. Even with the aspect, I was debating whether or not I was going to say this or not, but even with the aspect of like, for example, people who consider themselves to be transgender or the like, I recently had read an article where there was a individual who was transgender, who that individual is actually now trying to sue the doctors who had given her it was if I remember correctly, it was a person who was born physically as a woman and who felt at a younger age that they were transgender and had their gender changed to confirm them wanting to be male. And now as they're older, they want to be able to go back to being a woman, but because of the hormones that they've gone through and the surgeries that they've gone through, they're not able to do so. And so now this individual is actually trying to sue the doctors who have pushed for them to get this hormone therapy. And part of the thing that this individual mentions in the article was that this whole time that they were going through this, no one actually ever really sat down to actually talk to them and to try to like really work with them. It was just kind of like, okay, no, you need to take these hormone suppressors and you need to get this surgery before you reach puberty. And so like there was just this individual was just saying that there was just all this pressure on trying to overly affirm what she was going through at a young age and not really looking to actually engage her specifically. I'm just trying to see if I can pull up the article again. I sent it to someone, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm just trying to see if I can find it. You can read the article for yourself if you're interested. But again,
Assalamu alaikum. While you're looking, I just wanted to say, and I put it in the chat, there seems to be a growing movement of adults who transition while they were kids or very young. And it seems it's the same thing, like nobody really, or I guess the right people didn't sit down with them and dare they not mention, God. Um, so it's really, really, it's really, really sad. And I'm
Yeah.
complete.
Yeah, again, I'm not going to get into the aspect of uh like the politically correct things and so on and so forth, but just think about it. How many of you had all types of thoughts and ideas and things that you felt were correct when you were 10, 11, 12, 13, that now as an adult, you're kind of like, what in the world was I thinking? I know stuff that I thought and did and was thinking about at 20 that I'm like at the age that I'm at now, I'm like, what in the world was I thinking? And so again, I'm not getting into the aspect of whether or not a person truly has those feelings or whatever the case may be. I'm just saying that um, I'm just saying from the standpoint of how quickly the human being can change. Your perspective, fluctuates, you know, um, greatly, all throughout your life. Things that you believe or the things that you hold, valuable at 10, 11, 12 years old, oftentimes it's going to be completely different by the time that you're 30. Um, yeah, so this was a US News article. It says, I literally lost organs. Why detransition teens regret changing genders. I was failed by the system. I literally lost organs. When Chloe was 12 years old, she decided she was transgender. At 13, she came out to her parents. That same year, she was put on puberty blockers and prescribed testosterone. At 15, she underwent a double mastectomy. Less than a year later, she realized she made a mistake, all by the time she was 16 years old. Now 17, Chloe is one of a growing cohort called detransitioners, those who seek to reverse a gender transition, often after realizing they actually do identify with their biological sex. Tragically, many will struggle for the rest of their lives with the irreversible medical consequences of a decision they made as minors. I can't stay quiet, said Chloe. I need to do something about this and to share my own cautionary tale. And so, again, this is just an example. Is that you even see, I mean, this is within a span of basically a person's pubescent years. She says when Chloe was 12, she decided she was transgender. At 13, she came out to her parents. That same year, she was put on puberty blockers and prescribed testosterone. At 15, she underwent a double mastectomy. Less than a year later, she realized she made a mistake. And so, again, my emphasis here is more from the standpoint of because later on in the article, she talks about how um, she just didn't get the help that she felt that she needed. That it was all about, you know, basically getting the hormone blockers and the surgery. So she writes, I was going through a period where I was just really isolated at school, so I turned to the internet, she called. In her real life, Kirshner had a falling out with friends at school. Online, however, she found a community that welcomed her. My dysphoria was definitely triggered by this online community. I never thought about my gender or had a problem with being a girl before going on Tumblr. There was a lot of negativity around being a cis heterosexual white girl, and I took those messages really, really personally. She said she felt political pressure to transition too. The community was very social justicey. There was a lot of negativity around being a cis heterosexual white girl, and I took those messages really personally. Chloe Cole, a 17-year-old student in California, had a similar experience when she joined Instagram at 11. I started being exposed to a lot of LGBT content and activism. She said, I saw how trans people online got an overwhelming amount of support, and the amount of praise they were getting really spoke to me because at the time, I didn't really have a lot of friends of my own. Experts worry that many young people seeking to transition are doing so without a proper mental health evaluation. According to an online survey of detransitioners conducted by Dr. Lisa Littman, last year, 40% said their gender dysphoria was caused by a mental health condition, and 62% felt medical professionals did not investigate whether trauma was a factor in their transition decisions. So again, this is just a example of, unfortunately, in the medical field where we become so fixated on quote unquote fixing the problem that we actually don't even take the time to figure out, okay, what is everything that's actually going on here before we go to, take this drug or get this surgery or whatever the case may be. I get that, Imam, but maybe someone doesn't want to ask her Imam about divorce trauma, childhood trauma, etc., but still wants to work through issues in alignment with the deen. And so again, I'm not saying that you have to go to an Imam. I mean, in many cases, if you want me to be perfectly honest, many Imams are not equipped for that. There's a difference between being an Imam and being, for example, even a chaplain or a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist. And so I'm not saying that people don't go to specialists, but I'm just saying that I would say that you're more likely to, again, that's why I say I recommend a Muslim psychologist or a Muslim therapist or a Muslim, of course, Muslim chaplain, because this way they're more likely to be able to incorporate all those different aspects and not just focus on one. But the reason why I say I would give more different, like I was just kind of saying it from a standpoint of absolutes. Like if I only had to choose one, then I would choose the sheikh over the psychologist because again, the psychologist, he or she is just naturally trained from an academic perspective, not necessarily from a holistic perspective. Uh, I'm trying to keep up with the chat. Yeah. I thought there was something else that I missed. Yes, there was the aspect of arranged marriages. Why there were so many Muslim women got murdered by their parents due to arranged marriages. Usually they tried to marry someone they love, but the family didn't accept. Usually those girls were murdered by their parents and brothers. Do you think it's their faults or family misunderstood lost message about arranged marriages? So again, like some people have already placed in the chat, that is a misunderstanding in terms of the deen. So the thing is that unfortunately people will do things in the name of the deen that have nothing to do with the religion at all. And this goes for any religion. that, you know, people do things in the name of Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, any religion that actually has nothing to do with the religion itself. You know, so for example, you know, I was just looking in one of the Shafi fiqh books, one of the schools of law, in the section on marriage. So, for example, it mentions specifically in the book of fiqh that a woman is, and actually I can, so it's not just, you don't have to take my word for it. I'll read exactly what it says. The bride's right to marry a suitable match of her choice. Whenever a free woman, and this is just coming from the standpoint of earlier times when slavery was more common. So it's, you know, it's mentioning, you know, this case, but for the most part, this is any woman at this point, especially in a Western society or the majority of the world, because slavery is considered to be something that is impermissible with the majority of countries around the world. So, you know, just keep that in mind. But in any case, it mentions whenever a free woman asks to marry a suitor who is a suitable match. And of course, in this particular case, there are certain definitions that are mentioned for suitability. So, for example, it mentions suitability concerns lineage, religiousness, profession, and being free of defects that permit annulling the marriage contract. So, it gives different situations. So, a non-Arab for an Arab woman. And this is more or less something that has been, and this is not to say that a non-Arab cannot marry an Arab woman, but it's just to say that both the guardian and the woman would have to agree for that to take place. And then a corrupt man for a virtuous woman, meaning that it's not considered to be suitable for a righteous woman to marry a corrupt man, or a man of a lowly profession for the daughter of someone with a higher profession, you know, or someone with a defect that permits annulling the marriage for someone without such defects. And usually this will go into the aspect of physical intimacy. But in any case, again, whenever a free woman asks to marry a suitor who is a suitable match by telling her guardian, marry me to him, the guardian must marry her to him, whether she is a virgin or non-virgin, and whether prepubescent or not. The Islamic magistrate, meaning an Islamic judge, marries her to such a groom if the guardian, in the presence of the magistrate, refuses to marry her to the groom. And this is coming from Reliance of the Traveler, which is considered to be a very conservative book of Shafi'i fiqh. And the section, like I said, the title of the section, and I'm just going to take off my I can. There we go. This way everyone can see it. The bride's right to marry a suitable match of her choice. Whenever a free woman asks to marry a suitor who is a suitable match, by telling her guardian, marry me to him, the guardian must marry her to him, whether she is a virgin or non-virgin, whether prepubescent or not. The Islamic magistrate, i.e. the judge, marries her to such a groom if the guardian, in the presence of the magistrate, refuses to marry her to the groom. And like I said, this is coming from the Reliance of the Traveler, which is Umdat al-Sadiq wa Utat al-Nasik in the Arabic, that was translated by Sheikh Nuh Hamim Keller, who was a very staunch Shafi'i jurist, amongst other things. And that's specifically coming from the text of the book. So the aspect of these quote unquote honor killings and so on and so forth, These are not from Islam in terms of permissibility of it. Like we talked about before, the aspect of la darar or la dirar. There'll be no harming nor reciprocation of harm. So this aspect of like these quote unquote honor killings or these type of things, that is not from the standpoint of Islam. Now, the thing is that is there the concept of arranged marriages in Islam? Yes, there is. However, there's certain conditions that even go along with that. That it's not a situation where, for example, a father can just marry his daughter to whoever he wishes. That, for example, if the daughter says no, she does not want to be married to that individual, the father cannot force her to do so. Also, of the father himself, if he were to try to do an arranged marriage, he would have to make sure that the suitor is suitable. He himself would have to follow these same conditions, and so on and so forth. And this is just in one school of law. And at the end of the day, this can only be done by the father, and if in the absence of the father, the grandfather. And it can't be a situation where the father and the daughter are on bad terms with one another, meaning that the father may be doing it to harm the daughter. So there's a lot of things, but again, the unfortunate thing is that for many Muslims, we don't actually study the religion in any type of formal way. And we have these concepts that we think are correct or we think are acceptable, and it actually has nothing to do with the religion. So I just showed you right from a book of Islamic law that has the stamp of approval of Al-Azhar, that a woman has the right to choose, to the point that the book says specifically, if a woman finds a suitable match of her own choosing and she goes to her guardian and tells him, marry me to him, he must marry her. It is her choice. And if he tries to marry her to someone and he asks her if she wants to marry this person and she says no, he cannot force her to marry. So hopefully that helps to clear up some aspects of it. Yeah, but unfortunately, we have these issues taking place in the Muslim world. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help the Muslims.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I have a question about travel, praying while traveling. So if you are in a situation and from what I understand, you can combine Zohr and Asr prayer and Maghrib and Isha prayer, right? But let's just say you missed Zohr prayer, right? You missed Zohr prayer and you land or you're in a place where you can actually make the full-blown Asr prayer. How would you work? Would you make 4 rakahs of Zohr, making it up, and then Asr? Like, I got a little bit confused. I was traveling and I was like, wait a minute.
So you're saying that
prayers when I'm sing them?
So you say that you missed the Dhuhr prayer. You're traveling and you missed the Dhuhr prayer.
Yes.
Then you arrive at your destination. And so now you're trying to figure out how you're going to pray the Dhuhr and the Asr.
Yes. Do I combine them or do I make the 4? the 2 rakahs each, I
Okay.
guess.
So first I have to ask, are you coming from a particular school of law?
No.
Okay. So the scholars, they differ in regards to exactly when and how you can combine.
Mm.
For example, in the Hanafi school of law, they say that essentially you can only combine when you're on Hajj. So like the concept of combining is not even an option in the Hanafi school. The Maliki school, they say that you can only combine while you are an active traveler, meaning that while you're in the process of traveling, that is when it will be permissible to combine or even possibly shorten. But once you arrive at your destination, you're no longer able to take those dispensations. In the Shafi'i and the Hanbali school, those are the only 2 schools where they say that you can combine while traveling and then also possibly once you arrive to your visiting destination. I'm most familiar with the Shafi'i school, so I will tell you what the Shafi'i school would say in that type of situation. In the Shafi'i school, if a person is traveling and they miss the Dhuhr prayer, whether it be accidentally or whether it be intentionally, if they do not make the intention to combine their prayer with the Asr prayer in its later time, then it will be considered to be a qada prayer once they arrive. Meaning that that will be considered to be a makeup prayer for them if they did not make the intention to combine in the time of Asr. Because one of the conditions in the Shafi school for combining the prayer is you have to have the intention to combine in the time of the first prayer. So meaning that if I'm going to delay praying Dhuhr until Asr time, I'm going to combine Asr and Dhuhr together in the time of Asr time, I have to make the intention to do that in the time of Dhuhr. If I don't make the intention to do that, then can be considered to have missed the Asr, could be considered to have missed the Dhuhr prayer. And so now, because it's going to be considered to be a qada prayer, I have to make up that prayer in its capacity, meaning that I will pray the 4 rakahs. However, with the Asr prayer, then I can pray the Asr prayer if I've arrived to my destination and I'm going to be there for less than 4 days. If I arrive to my destination and I'm going to be there for less than 4 days, then I can possibly decide that I'm going to shorten the Asr prayer. Does that make sense?
Yes. I get yes. Thank you. I guess I have to do a little bit more research too. And thank you for mentioning what school of thought, because up until recently, I would just make up prayers. I was just like a praying machine. And then I was praying, and then I was praying Maghrib, and then a sister was like, okay, um you can, combine the prayer, the Isha prayer. Or maybe it was vice versa. But basically, it was like, okay, you can make 2 rakahs. And I was like, oh, wow. It's like, Allah makes it easy for us. But I never knew, I heard about it, but I never really knew that I could do it. So then for the rest of the trip, I was just trying to figure it out. Like, people were doing their own thing, saying, don't forget to combine your prayers. But I guess they made that intention. But me, because I was new to it, I was a little bit confused. I didn't understand it. It depends on the school of thought, or if you even apply the school of thought. You understand what I'm saying? Like, for example, I know I was about to get on the plane, so I was going to miss Maghrib and Isha. So in my head, I was like, well, do I make the prayers in advance, or once I arrive, it'll just be a makeup prayer? You understand? Like, how would you answer that?
Yeah, so I'll read to you the specific aspect is in regards to that, well, at least a portion of it.
No, sorry, it's a lot.
The necessary condition for joining 2 prayers in the time of the second of them is that one make the intention to do so before the end of the first prayer's time, by interval which would contain at least 1 rakah. If one neglects this intention, one has sinned, and praying the first prayer during the second prayer's time is considered making it up, like we said before. So it will be considered to be a qada prayer. it'll be a makeup prayer. And also that the travel continues through both prayers, meaning that you have to, again, you have to still be considered to be a traveler through both prayers. And so when joining two prayers in the time of the second, it's recommended to pray the first one before the second, to not pause at length between them, and that the intention to join them be present when the prayer one performs first. And so again, it will be a situation where it's going to be considered to be a qada. And if I'm not mistaken, when it becomes considered to be a qada, you're going to have to pray the full 4 rakas of the prayer. So, I mean, essentially, you will still be combining them in a sense, but it would be a situation where you be, technically speaking, according to the Shafi school, you'd be have considered to be sinful for not making the intention in the first of the prayer time.
Could you repeat that? You're saying that I needed, so I could just understand. So I needed to make that intention during Zohar. You know what, I'm going to make, I tend to combine my Zohar and Asr while I'm still in Zohar. And then.
Yes. So essentially what you would do is that if you know that you're going to be delaying praying your prayer to the next coming prayer time, because again, as you said, you can only combine between Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. So if I'm going to be combining Dhuhr and Asr in the time of Asr, I have to make my intention to do that in the time of Dhuhr. Sometime before Dhuhr goes out, I would have to make that intention. If I don't, technically speaking, according to the Shafi school, I would be sinful for doing so. I would still have the obligation to pray Dhuhr, but I would have considered to be missing a condition of the permissibility to combine. And so that will be the situation, is that it will be a situation where you would just want to make sure that you make the intention to combine in the second prayer time in the time of the first.
Okay. And then what if I get to the second prayer? I'm sorry if you've said this already. If I get to the second prayer, if I get to Asr, but I miss Zohar, then I would just make up the full 4 rakahs for the prayer that I missed. Or do I make the intention to come?
Well, the thing is that, I mean, technically speaking, because the thing is that you wouldn't be combining at that point technically, but not like you would. Because the thing is that if you didn't make the intention in the Dhuhr time, but you still haven't prayed Dhuhr, you still have to pray Dhuhr.
Yes.
So, I mean, whether or not you want to consider it to be combining or not, at this point, it's going to be more or less semantics.
Okay.
So the thing is that technically speaking, in the Shafi school, you wouldn't be combining, just because at least in the case of like the permissible combining in terms of the dispensation, rather, again, it will be considered to be a qada. It'd be considered to be a makeup prayer that you're doing.
Okay. I'm getting there. I'm thinking I'm understanding. All right. Shukran.
That's one. And so, inshallah, I think we will stop here because we've come to 8:30 and also it's time for Maghrib, at least where I'm at. So inshallah, we will stop here, and jazakallah khair for everyone for joining us today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make your affairs easy. Any benefit that may have come from this is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and anything else incorrect or wrong is only from the weakness of myself, and I pray that you'll please forgive me for that. And so inshallah, we will leave you in Allah's care. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وحسبنا ونعم الوكيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Walaikum assalam.